Greetings, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining today's IAM Online, the monthly webinar focused on identity and access management and brought to you by InCommon. My name is April Motley and I am the communications lead for InCommon, and I'm helping to host this hour of community and collaboration. In just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for the hour, but please first note the following. We will be taking questions and comments live following the presentation using the Zoom Q&A function. So please send those messages during the presentation because we want this to be as interactive as possible. But if possible, do submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A function. Also, feel free to post messages in chat. Just be sure that you're posting your message to the entire group. That's in your drop-down menu options. And also, for anyone wondering, we are recording this webinar. You will receive a link to the recording via email, and it will also be posted to the InCommon website and to our IAM Online YouTube channel. So without further ado, I will pass things over to Steve Zoppi to introduce our topic and speaker for today.
Thank you, April. Welcome, everyone. We're glad to see you all here. And my purpose right now is just to set a little context, because the topic that we're about to explore today has relevance in myriad contexts and in many of our advisory committees. In the continuously evolving universe of identity and access management, we're all challenged by the complexity of implementing technological innovations that can be integrated into the daily lives of our constituents, with the objective of making the services easier to access and remaining secure. These are challenging times and challenging things to navigate. So those challenges continue to grow with the complexity in the services offered by commercial and institutional providers as new challenges to privacy and security arise. And then there's the subject of standards. As our industry pioneer, Andrew Tannenbaum, observes, the nice thing about standards is that there are so many of them. Moreover, standards seldom stand still or stand alone, especially in the tools that clients use to access these online services. Authentication and authorization, the two pillars of our IAM world, are topics we frequently explore and share in the IAM Online context, with hopes that successes and lessons of our community will be of value to other community members. Specifically in the browser world, there are significant changes being enacted by commercial interests intended to benefit the privacy and security of end users. While some of these changes may ultimately interfere with our community's current ability to easily access services that we consume and provide to each other, some advances are geared to overhaul old ways of doing things with new and better ways. As a community, we're challenged to adopt and deploy those changes as seamlessly as possible to large populace of diverse and ever-changing requirements in the mission of higher education and research. WebAuthn is one of those advances, which promises to bring us closer to the objective of password-free authentication, but has its own challenges and implications in its deployment and administration. Today, we get to explore this aspect of authentication with Tariq Wilson, a member of our community serving the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for the last 2 years as a software engineer on the identity management team, who will share with us their journey in implementing password-free logins. Without further ado, I'll pass the baton to Tariq.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Of course, I'm on East Coast time, so we have an interesting presentation for everyone, and we'd love to share our journey with WebAuthn and what we call at UNC Carolina Key. So let me share my screen. Yes, so yep, Carolina Key. This is our custom-made logo for Carolina Key, as we'll be using to market this technology to folks at the university. So today I'll talk about what WebAuthn is and why we're implementing WebAuthn at UNC. Just go over the project timeline, talk about the architecture and development aspect of the project, talk about communication strategies, and that's been extremely important. Of course, I'm going to cover challenges, which there have been many of, and we'll cover them. And I'll just give a brief demo after that. So What is WebAuthn? So WebAuthn was announced in 2019 by the World Wide Web Consortium and is a global standard for password-free login and authentication. The WebAuthn API is supported by all the major browsers: Firefox, Chrome, Edge, Opera, Safari, and also some more device-specific browsers. But there is pretty much universal support for the WebAuthn API. It relies on public key cryptography, so I won't go into that at all, but for those who are familiar with cryptography, that is the basis of this technology. And basically, you will authenticate to a service or a website using your device and or a hardware key. So a device can be your laptop, Mac, Windows machine, whatever your mobile device happens to be, tablet, or a YubiKey, which you can, or YubiKey or a key similar to a YubiKey for authentication. So continue with what WebAuthn is. So unfortunately, one of the most, if you search for WebAuthn on the web, this is one of the top sites that'll come up, and it is WebAuthn is great and it sucks. And that's one of the top Google search results. So I have to somewhat agree with that assessment after working with it for 2 years. That is sad but true initially. There is a very tall barrier to entry. It's like once you start, it's kind of hard to understand where to begin. Although there are lots of sites that describe the technology, there are just so many pieces to it. There are lots of acronyms. There are lots of bad, outdated code examples. You have so many pieces, so many browsers, so many devices. You have your backend services that you have to integrate with. You have your front end, depends on if it's a React system or a native JavaScript. So many pieces have to come together, and there's not a lot of good demos on how to tie all those things together. So I have to say, and we've had to actually overcome some of the stigma that's associated with WebAuthn because of sites like this. But I think once you get your arms around it, it's actually pretty cool. And once you get settled, it is a great technology. So you have to overcome some of the perceptions and the stigma that's associated with it, but it is a really cool technology. And I'll walk through our implementation strategy. So why WebAuthn at UNC? Well, we've had an increase in phishing attacks. Some folks that you wouldn't even expect to fall victim to them have. IT professionals, I think we're all susceptible. Hackers and other parties are becoming very sophisticated at making emails look official and look like they come from an official source. So we're trying to mitigate some of those effects. We would like to reduce the number of help desk incidents regarding password management. So I forgot the stats, but I think that is one of their most interesting topics and calls that they receive at the help desk is to help people manage passwords. We'd like to improve overall system security, right? I mean, if there is a breach, we haven't had one, but if there is a breach or at any organization, you don't want to have a file or a database of passwords to be leaked with that breach. So that just the optics and the fact that happens is a terrible thing. So you'd like to improve your overall system security and not have eventually not have passwords even be a vector. And also WebAuthn is a multi-factor authentication as well. So we add additional factors, which also increases security and safeguards access to our systems. We do think WebAuthn does enhance the user experience. I mean, we've come up with, meaning users, people, we've come up with all sorts of tools to help manage passwords, password managers. I have 2 of them, one for UNC, one for my personal experience. And then you have the password managers built in the browsers. It's nice if you don't have to worry about those things and you can have just a more seamless process for accessing your applications. I think folks are getting, and I am getting used to using the biometrics of my various devices to access certain systems, either access the device itself or services that are offered by the device. So I think we can leverage that experience with the web and access to our systems. And then finally, we like to reduce Duo. I guess on the management side, this is not my concern, but there is a fee associated with pushes and the overall interaction with Duo, and then users would like to not have to use Duo. So with our WebAuthn strategy for certain sites, if you authenticate using WebAuthn, you won't have to use Duo. So we'll have a decrease in that as well. So the UNC WebAuthn timeline. So I started this project a little over about 2 years ago, yeah. And that's when we started the project and just started to think about how we will go about implementing WebAuthn. I think we finally figured out a strategy, and we started our sprints early in 2021. We just iterated over that almost for the entire year, where we gathered requirements. We worked with different partners and especially Duke. They were very helpful to us as far as like bouncing ideas off of them and looking at some of their initial code that they've open sourced to help get started. So taking that, we design, develop, release internally, get some feedback, learn, and just go through the whole process over again. So we did that for most of 2021. The results of that, we had an initial pilot release to production in spring of 2022. So about 7 months ago this year. So it's been in production for a small subset of users. So we did have to overhaul the user interface just to support WebAuthn. And we allowed access to WebAuthn based on, group of groups and certain groups. So very limited pilot, but we got a lot of feedback over the past 7 months. And based off that feedback, we then went hard again on development, spring, summer of this year. And as a result of that, we are ready to go to production tonight. So I'm here with you guys to help distract from the fact that we're going to do this tonight, but it should be pretty cool. So we're going to release to production tonight. It'll still be a limited audience. We're going to slowly grant students access to WebAuthn, and hopefully early November, it will be open to the entire student population. And I'll talk about why we're limiting access to students. Again, open to all students in early November. Architecture. So this is almost a cartoonish diagram, but just wanted to show the different components, architecture components of our implementation. So of course we have Shibboleth system, which is the main component here. And then we have, and that's, that's where all single sign-on requests originate, and that's with our Shibboleth application. Then we developed a custom registration application. That application is built using Spring Framework, basically for the web server and some of the other environmental things that we like with Spring, because we're mostly a Java shop. And on the front end, we're using Vue.js for reactive. On the back end, we have some microservices built using Spring, and the Shibboleth system and our registration application both make use of the web services. And I'll talk about what they do in a little bit more detail. And then on the back end, we have just a custom database for all of our WebAuthn data that we use, where we store the registrations and everything associated with WebAuthn itself. And of course, it's using Active Directory to deal with the user accounts. And then we use Grouper right now to manage who has access to the pilot groups. So we have different pilot groups stored in WebAuthn. And if you are in that, in Grouper, sorry, and if you are in that pilot group or one of them, then you can have access to registration and then use WebAuthn. So development. So we had 3 different streams, 3 different large components, like I mentioned on the previous slide. So we have the Shibboleth side. So Shibboleth, there was lots of development there. So, I think folks here have a lot of experience there. So for our implementation, we had to develop a whole new set of custom user interfaces. So all of the views have been changed, and there was already some of that in place prior to using or integrating WebAuthn, but we developed even new user interfaces to support WebAuthn. One thing we wanted to do is when we talked about enhancing user experience, we wanted to make it quick. We really wanted to sell WebAuthn. So the folks on the product team came up with the idea of a one-click access. So, and I'll demo this, but once you log in with WebAuthn, then we'll drop a cookie essentially saying, oh, you've logged in with WebAuthn. You don't have to enter your username or anything else. Once you come back to the SSO screen, if you've done it before, you can just click WebAuthn and then your log in, and then your biometrics, whatever the biometric interface is associated with your system, that will fire up, and then you're able to access. So get to the SSO screen, click log in. If you're using FaceTime, you smile, and then you're on your way. So, and I'll demo that. We had to create new actions also on the back end to support WebAuthn. So this is a Spring Webflow application. So we had to, on the back end, so we had to develop a whole host of new actions to support some of the data that we collect and store for WebAuthn. So there was new actions there. We had to create a new registration servlet, and the registration servlet collects, starts the initial process, because, if you were to look at like the developer tools on your browser, on a WebAuthn session, there's a lot of things going on when you try and log in or authenticate using WebAuthn. So a lot of chatter going back and forth between the browser and the web server to communicate and initiate and complete the process. So we had to develop servlets to help facilitate that. And then, of course, if you ever been into the conf directories or into the guts of Shibboleth, we had to create a whole new set of configuration files to support this as well. So it was a really large effort to just integrate this with Shibboleth. So lots of Java development and HTML, JavaScript development on this end. Then we developed a registration application. So this is a relatively simple application. No, not simple. I'll take that back. The architecture is relatively simple. So it's built on Spring Boot, and that provides some services on the back end for the front end. So it's a BFF for the front end. Front end is all new Vue, a Vue.js system. So custom developed in-house. So we completely developed that system. And then we developed Spring Boot services to support the user interface components. That is, everything is deployed in OpenShift, and that is just a native built and deployed as a Docker image and deployed in OpenShift. And then on the back end, like in the previous architecture diagram, we have WebAuthn services to support both of these two components. So it's a Spring Boot application with RESTful services. Services support the login process, the registration process, and then user management process. As we roll this out, there is, we're going to have to add more support for the help desk and other administrative folks to take administrative actions on certain accounts, enable, disable, help people when they're stuck. So there is some of that there, but this will be extended even further to help support more of the administrative side of WebAuthn. Communications. So we found that communications are vital, like I showed in that previous slide. Some folks think, oh, let's go back. What happened? Yeah, communications are vital. There are a lot of mysteries around WebAuthn. There are a lot of mysteries around biometrics and your devices. So you have to over communicate, and we found, as far as explaining to people what this is and how this will help them. I've been asked this a million times. I know people who are on the faculty, and they always ask me, without fail, will UNC have access to my my bio information? Will they have my fingerprints or my iris scans or anything else that your device collects for this process? So that's a resounding no. That is all stored on your device. And I always say, you're an employee here anyway. They've done background checks and everything about you. So, but we always say the device will always contain that information. So we won't store. So you have to communicate that to folks, and usually puts them at ease. What else? Oh, what else is some other feedback we've gotten, but it's really important to communicate, what we're going to do, how it's going to help them. One thing that we've done through the process is we capture surveys from pilot users, and that's gone a long way towards helping to streamline operations and gather feedback and implement those as quickly as possible. So capturing feedback and communicating with folks has been extremely important on our side. We also have a website, a wiki, essentially, internally, that folks can access that answers a whole raft of questions, and it's been very helpful to help demystify the process and explain how it will help the university and make their lives somewhat easier. So challenges, many challenges. Like I said, the implementation is not easy. You are bridging lots of technologies that while there is a bridge to be built, you have to build that bridge, and it's not like entry-level work. It's really tough work. Once you build that bridge, it's built. But implementation is not easy. You have to have a experience with a whole host of technologies, JavaScript, and some interesting JavaScript to implement WebAuthn. You have to have things on the server side to collect this information and communicate with your front end. So there are challenges there. You have to have deep experience with Shibboleth, and you have to really get into the guts of Shibboleth to extend that to make it work there. You have to have really good Java skills, I've found, to build some of the custom code on the back end to help support this. I mean, at least for us, a little Shibboleth is a Java application, so you'll need that there, at least to interact with Shibboleth there. So lots of technologies, lots of moving parts, and quite frankly, some weird JavaScript that you have to learn to get this working. Interactions differ by device. This is a challenge that will always exist, and we haven't found a way to bridge this. What we did was we did heavily involve the help desk and as far as testing the application, so they can become familiar with some of the pain points, so they can answer calls and work with users more effectively. But every device has a different dialogue for showing the WebAuthn to its users. So cool thing is, like, you know, if you use different browsers on a device, once the browser kicks it over to your device, it's all the same. But Windows has a different process than my Android phone, different process from Macs, iOS is all different. And some of it is a little bit wonky. So you've got to figure that out. For the most part, it is. On the happy path, it is relatively simple, but there are challenges because, you know, usually as an application developer, you want to have control over your entire ecosystem, and there you don't really have control. You have to trust that the device maker has you know, taken care as far as implementing the controls for WebAuthn. Another thing that we've had is, like, so we have a lot of managed desktops, and this is part of the strategy for pushing out to users. So, you know, we have Windows Hello for Business, so we have to push that out and turn that on, and there have been some challenges there. So on the staff side, it hasn't been a seamless process to enable Windows Hello for Business, so there's been a slow uptake as far as the staff is concerned. This is why we're rolling it out a little more slowly to them. And there are certain folks who are in the pilot group, advanced users, people that like to be on the bleeding edge, I guess, and they've been developing, and I have it. A lot of us do, but it's not as simple as, hey, push it out to everyone. Windows Hello was enabled, ready to go. So there have been some challenges there, but we're overcoming those. The other thing is automation. So if you are big into test automation, has some challenges there. You can imagine it's hard to test for different devices in an automated fashion, especially when that control is again turned over to a device and it leaves the browser. There are some virtual, there's like a virtual authenticators and things you can do, but it's not seamless and it doesn't fully capture like the user experience. So we've had some challenges with automating our testing of our user interfaces for WebAuthn. And then just users with multiple device registrations may be confused. So this is something that we run into. We haven't fully figured out how to solve this. And I think, you know, myself, who've been using this since it rolled out, you kind of learn, how to use it for a specific device. So once you register for a device. And we always have to act like, your cookies or anything you set on the user environment, local storage, session storage, whatever is going to be unavailable for whatever reason. Maybe they've cleared things, maybe they've got a new machine. So once you register for a particular device, it's hard to tell, like if you log into another device, that registration is not tied to that device. Unless you want to store some tracking things and stuff like that, which we're not doing. So, when users have multiple registrations, we can't really tell the device that registration is tied to until they initiate a registration. So we haven't really figured out how to overcome that, but most people don't have tons of devices. Most people have one or two, so it's not an issue. But if you have multiple, like me, and I'm a developer, we've had some challenges there on how to tie a registration to a specific device when you haven't been there before. We always have to accommodate or plan for someone who hasn't logged in from that device, because your cookie could be erased or whatever. So it's been a team effort. So, UNC, I forgot how many students we have or how large the population is, but this is a huge system, lots of impressions per day, lots of logins per day. So this cannot fail. And so we have a large team dedicated to making sure this works correctly and it suits the needs of the university. So I just wanted to talk about some of our team, the teams that came together to help to bring this to fruition. We have, of course, the identity management team, security team, which reviewed everything, because there are lots of settings you can have. Let's go, for instance, there's a way where you can say, like right now, in a Boyd universe, bring your own device universe, I'm bringing my phone to the party, right, to log into systems. There's also a way to increase the security of WebAuthn. You can really go and really lock this down, and you can install certificates. You can have the device certificate stored on the server side to say, hey, not only do you, because initially you're going to authenticate using your university credentials, but not only that, but also want the certificate associated with your device. And I'm going to store that, and that'll be part of the entire WebAuthn process. You can't do that easily in the bring your own device world, because vendors roll out devices, updates all the time. A certificate could expire, and say if we had something like that enabled, when a device updates, you could lose the certificate, could change, and they could lose their access. So when you don't have control over your devices, but security had to help make some of these calls to figure out what's acceptable, what's an acceptable level of risk. So they've been involved in the entire process the entire time. So security's been really important to everything we've decided to do. The accessibility team has been paramount, because there are lots of regulations we have to follow as far as making sure it's accessible by folks with all manner of methods of accessing the system. So we've had to interact with accessibility, communications, like what I've talked to before. We try and get ahead of the messaging aspect, project management team to pull everyone together, infrastructure for deployments, and then help desk, because once this goes live, I'm sure they're going to get calls. Because one thing that the university, I'm sure other organizations try to do as well, is say, be vigilant about changes to the login screens, because if there is any change, that means you could be phished or you could be taken to a different site. So when you roll out any change to the SSO page, there's a raft of calls that come to vigilant Carolinians about a change. So we just had to work with the help desk to prepare for that, send out a lot of communication so folks aren't alarmed. So it's been a large team effort to get this right. Demo. So here's the fun part. This will be quick, I think. So let me switch to my browser here. So this is me accessing a service provider. Before I access the service provider, I'm brought to our single sign-on screen. So this is our new user interface. So there's a new, if you notice, to lots of enterprise systems, I guess in the past you would see like username, password. But right now, the way things are going, there are lots of different ways to authenticate to different systems. So a pattern is where you you would just take their username, and once you have the username, use that to determine what they have access to next. And that's what we're doing here, because certain users will have access to WebAuthn, certain users won't. And then there are other things in the future which are in the plans to integrate with this page. So we first collect their onion is what we call, which is their username. So for me, I've already logged into Carolina Key, so I have the Carolina Key login button here. But if I did not, I'll use Chucky, then this is what the user interface will look like for users who don't have access to Carolina Key, which is relatively simple user interface, which is what we're used to. So if I were to log in with this account, then with the password, and I won't show, then you'll be presented with the Duo challenge screens. But for myself, for this demo, I'm going to our registration site. So all I did was hit the button and fingerprint, and now I'm taken to our Carolina Key registration website. So we have lots of verbiage here about, how it works and, what we're trying to do. And then here are our registered Carolina Keys. So Carolina Key is essentially a device. A device is your key. So I have 6 devices registered here that I can use to access our systems. If I wanted to register a new one, all I do is select register new device. We try and just guess what your device is, just to give you some hints towards naming it. And then hit save. Already registered this one, so we'll complain that one exists. Let's delete it here. And making sure it's me. So again, one other thing, on a MacBook, it'll be a totally different user interface. At least that dialog that showed itself. So the device successfully registered. You may now use it to log in. Close. So there we go. UNC Windows 10 is there. I can rename that device or delete it. And there are some management functions there to help manage users. So I can log out. And let's just clear my cookies. And we'll go back to the registration page. And the only reason why my username is stored here is because I'm using it's LastPass and I haven't turned that off. So there are if you haven't logged in with Carolina Key, you'll have to enter your onion every time, unless you're using a password manager. So Carolina Key, sign in. I'll sign in again. Fingerprint takes me to the site. Now, since I've logged in, just as a convenience, and this is where we're trying to make it a quicker experience for users, I'm logging into a different service provider. So see, it remembers, Tariq, I've logged in, Carolina Key button is available. This is all I have to press. And if I was using FaceTime, I just smile and I'm in. So, and then your access, this happens to be the registration page, but it's a site, but it can be any other service provider. And also, as you notice, there is no Duo involved in that process. Let's see, and then you can always log in, because there are certain service providers where we would like to still use Duo. So we're still figuring out, what that looks like. But in those cases, if you don't have your device with you, you can always use your password, and then you're taken into the Duo process here. Now cancel that. So that's our implementation there, and that's it.
Excellent. We have a number of questions that have queued up. I tried answering one of them. Feel free to read that exchange between myself and David St. Pierre Bance, and we have 11 open questions right now. If there are comments in chat, I didn't see any appear there, so I think I thank you all for putting the comments or the questions in the Q&A Zoom channel. So most of the things that are left here, Tariq, are directed to you and the project and the work, so I'll let you pull those up and I'll read them along with you so that those who are only attending by audio can hear that as well.
Okay.
But the very first question from Michael is, how many FTE were focused on the sprints throughout 2021?
Let's say 1.5.
And was that the full-time equivalents, were they, I'm adding on to the question just because I know I have a frequent understanding of how people get, how a full-time equivalent is shared. Was this dedicated 100% to this work or, okay.
Yes, yep. So one, and that was me, dedicated 100% to this work. And then there was another developer who was about half-time who would help when he had availability. But then we had a whole raft of people that we would pull in as far as the teams that I mentioned to help, with other issues.
Fair enough. Great. Michael Hodges asks, are the SHIB views, configs, etc., the registration app, etc., shared on GitHub or elsewhere?
Yeah, so not by us. So we have been looking at definitely sharing like our registration service, because I know folks have asked us about that in the past. So as soon as we get to a point to where we can breathe, we will look at open sourcing some of our development.
Excellent. And if there are follow-on questions, feel free to add them into the channel as well. I'm looking ahead as I'm reading through these on behalf of Tariq. So Duo offers passwordless as an option now and can be utilized through tiered services, Duo MFA, Duo Access, and Duo Beyond. And I think that this is more just expanding on a comment that you had made during the demo and the presentation about Duo features and minimizing their use, but there are some other additional things here. Abraham, if you want to add any additional comments to that, feel free.
Yeah, because I don't, it's not going away anytime soon. We just, I guess, to reduce the reliance on it and at least make it more seamless. But that will be interesting to see what Duo is offering in this space.
And the follow-up question is there a plan to go Duo, use the new Duo passwordless option in your environment? It sounds like from your presentation that's something you're trying to avoid.
Yeah, it hasn't been presented to me as an option, so it might be someone else may be making that decision, but I'm not aware.
Okay, Nadim asks, do you give each device a nickname like Duke Unlock does? Yes,
we do. So that's when you we're in a registration app, and then you set this device, and it said Windows 10. We just try and basically read the user agent for that device, and then we will just give you a nice name, but you can rename that to whatever you want it to be. So every device does have a nickname.
And Rohit asks, what was your security testing like? Too many moving pieces in this architecture. Any missed vulnerability can turn disastrous. Just wondering if the security aspect was extensively tested.
Oh yeah, it was extensive. So there are a lot of moving pieces, but this is the problem. Once you go to a microservice architecture, which is what we essentially have. I mean, you could have bundled all of that into Shibboleth, but this is typical for nowadays. I have a whole bunch of little services on the back end that are communicating to achieve some goal. So we're just following those new patterns, but we did have extensive testing to make sure that things are complete. So the typical things, vulnerable port scanning, and we did find not a vulnerability, but certain things that we could show up. You look at your libraries that you're using to make sure that those are all, those don't have vulnerabilities. You look at your deployments to make sure all open ports are closed, no passwords, typical things. We did run the scans that the university typically runs before they deploy something like this.
And an aspect of this that was related to David's question about whether the Shibboleth Consortium is going to adopt any of these modules or is going to build a response. For those who are just connected by audio, I just thought I'd replay a portion of that because it relates to this, which is there are a lot of moving parts. I want to underscore what Tariq just said. And so whether or not the Shibboleth IDP has inbuilt support for WebAuthn is only a portion of the implementation puzzle. It is not the key to it. And so whether I know that the engineering team is talking about this, actively researching sort of a best interface way of presenting this. And there are a lot of conversations on the SHIB mail lists about this periodically that pop up. So you're encouraged to look at those as well to follow along. It is also the case that if there is a community solution, a community module implementation, et cetera, that is acceptable to the engineering team, they have incorporated stuff in the past in the core. So it's certainly something that could be considered, but I don't have a definitive answer to that. But Internet2 is a principal investor in the Shibboleth Consortium, so I just thought I would take that on as a part of this question.
Thank you.
Krishna asks, question on resources. Was it developed and implemented with internal resources? Did you have any external implementation partners?
Well, yeah, this was all internal, but I always, you know, rivals, right? Duke and UNC rivals, but I always try and shout out Duke because they actually open sourced their initial rollout of not name their rollout, but like a proof of concept essentially for integrating with WebAuthn. So that got us off the ground. So initially we had a couple conversations with them to share what we were doing and to learn about some of their lessons learned as well. So that's the most we've done as far as outsourcing, just to try and understand what folks are doing and the challenges they've had, but all the development has been done in-house. But some of the code to get off the ground was, you know, from other folks.
And I skipped over Winston's question. I scrolled back up and there it is. Are you buying bulk keys to distribute, sell, or just having users bring their own?
So there has been some discussion about buying bulk keys, but they've decided not to do that. Forgot the reason why, but just I think it's been more effective to just, especially for students, to say, hey, use your phone. Everyone's tethered completely to their phone or their device. So we don't have to use keys, but if you need one, actually you can request one. I have one at the university for testing, but if you need one, they'll give you one, but there's no plan to give it out to everyone at the university.
And then Nadim asks, we are in the process of rolling out our own passwordless solution based on Duke Unlock, and we're trying to create the logic that you just showed after the username and then display whether or not a user can enter a password or use the passwordless option. Are you willing to share how you do that in Shibboleth?
Sure. Yep. It's that's where the part I mentioned where you have to develop custom servlets, and this is where I guess is, you know, you have to. We don't develop a lot of servlets anymore in the Java world. You develop, you know, Spring or something that wraps around it. But at this level, at least on the Shibboleth side, we have to develop a servlet that the user interface can call back to, which then delegates to our backend services to make that call. So I can share that, but yeah, there's a servlet that we developed to answer those calls and provide a yes or no.
Sorry, Tariq, and related to this, I'm skipping ahead just a little bit and I'll come back to the other questions. Will UNC share the code for their implementation? This is related to the exact same question that's being asked now. So thought
So there was a plan. We have discussed that internally about sharing that, but like as soon as we can get through these next couple of weeks as far as rollouts, we'll definitely revisit that. But we definitely want to contribute back because that's what helped us to get off the ground.
And then Brent asks, can you explain how this would work with lab computers or public computers? Do you reject the option for users to register a student lab or public computer?
That's a good question. We don't know that it's a public computer, so you can do that. How do we secure that? Yeah, we've gone through that on the security rounds, but I guess it would be similar to just logging in with the username and password. Because there's still a challenge if you use a public computer, right? There's still some challenge. If you use your YubiKey, you have to have that device. If you're using a biometric, where I hope a public computer doesn't have a biometric device, you'll still have to use your fingerprint or your face. So there will always be an additional challenge even if you're using a public computer. So we're okay there, and we do allow it. But yeah, it's actually more secure than a password because you'll have to physically have that thing to say, I am me, which is your YubiKey or your device itself. And also on flights. So for instance, if it's a public computer, especially on a university, they should not have Windows Hello involved, enabled, where you can do that. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of things that have to break down for it to be, a large issue, but we're okay there.
As is always the joy, there's there's always the what happens if I lose the thing I have, and then how do I rebootstrap myself into the system from that point. And I don't know if you've had a number of dry run experiences with people losing things, but I'm sure that you might have some pointers on that as well.
Yeah, here's a great example. This happened to me, and I was embarrassed for a second. So I upgraded my phone, and I went to log in, and it kept rejecting it. My phone, I already said this is registered device, and then I updated my phone. So I had to go onto the registration site, just delete that key, and then add it for that phone. So, all you have to do is go delete the key or have someone from the help desk delete it, and then you re-register and you're good to go.
Excellent. Michael asks, what is the thinking behind services must use Duo?
There's still a comfort zone, a comfort, right? You just want as many, and this is not me. But there are, certain folks just want as many boxes checked to access certain things. So I think that's going to go away. That was some of the initial pilot, which is to like, hey, let's make sure this works for everyone and it's secure. Just some folks just have to get comfortable with certain security, and then once that comfort is there, I think then it'll go away. But yeah, I get you, but just people way above our pay grade just want as many boxes checked on certain systems. There are some highly sensitive systems here that folks want to have additional access controls on.
And speaking of checking boxes, Jeremy asks, have you performed surveys of campus hardware that can support WebAuthn?
Yes, we do. We have, and that's part of the slow rollout to students. So students have the latest and greatest hardware. Faculty don't always have that. So that's part of the reason why there isn't an automatic push. But they do have an idea of what devices are on. They do know, yeah. And they expect to have all those issues mitigated early 2023. So early 2023, hopefully this will just be generally available to everyone at the university.
Excellent. And then Lance asks, does this introduce any unique issues with user deprovisioning?
It sure does. That's our next project. That's the next project. It's a deprovisioning project and how to tie that into everything. So yes, that's a great question.
Eric asks, what is the impact to RefEd's MFA assertion for SPs that may require MFA signaling?
Yeah, that's a good question, and someone told me that would come up. I just didn't have enough time to refigure it, but in the configuration file, there is an association. You just have to associate the WebAuthn to the RefEd's profile. So there's a way you say RefEd's and it's associated with MFA. So WebAuthn is associated with MFA, so it'll work. Is that a good answer? That's the best I could. Yeah, we tested that. And we haven't found any challenges there. But there was inside of the configuration. That's what I was talking about. You have to go deep inside that. I know about how it conf, authn, and there's a whole raft of configuration files in there that you have to set.
Excellent. And we have a few minutes more for questions. I'm going to try and power through them as much as I can. Pavel asks about Windows Hello for Business. I suppose you have computers in the AD domain. Is it only enabled so that users have to register each computer separately, or do they log into the computer and Hello is set up automatically, and then they just do the passwordless login?
No, so let me read that accordingly. Yeah, so no, they will have to register each computer separately. So once you enable Windows Hello for Business, and then you have to integrate that with the VPN. There's a whole bunch of things that you have to enable that for just for the device itself. And then once you log into WebAuthn, it'll say, oh, you can use this as well. So you also have to register your laptop in addition to, but it's just saying, since this is available on your laptop, you can then use it for WebAuthn. But yeah, it will be also generally available to log onto your laptop, but you can use that to access everything else that you have access to from your system.
And then Michael asks, did you have to upgrade your AD environment to support Windows Hello?
There was some work there. I'm not sure of all the details, but it was that's one thing that took us a while. I wasn't involved in that. I was just part of the discussions, but there was some work there.
And does the security team consider a login on a registered device with a fingerprint an equivalent dual factor authentication as the old way with password and duo push?
I'll say just equivalent from as far as, MFA or multi-factors. So so Duo is basically there to implement multi-factor authentication, and WebAuthn is an equivalent to or suffices for multi-factor authentication. So it's almost, yes, technically it is equal, but like I said, there's still some, it'll still be around for a while. But yeah, it is multi-factor similar to Duo. And also just to keep in mind, as far as the registration process is concerned, you have to go through the Duo process. I didn't show that because you don't have any WebAuthn registrations available. So you're still using username and password. So you have to use Duo to even register. So that's another check to even get to the registration site.
And Matthew writes, thank you for the presentation, which I will second in another moment. But would you please tell me what, if any, anticipated impact the custom implementation will have on shibboleth patching and testing?
Yeah, there will be. And I think, so even prior to WebAuthn, the team there, they've had to extend shibboleth for other reasons. So there is an extensive testing process as far as upgrading to a new version of shibboleth. So this will just be folded into that. I haven't been part of that, but I do know that they are in place. But there will be, what we tried to do as much as possible is not disturb the base ecosystem of shibboleth. So, and what we do is, even when I want to get started on a new one locally, I just download shibboleth and then we overlay our files on top of that. And that's basically our basic implementation. And there are some custom things we do, but that's not a lot. It's like we coexist with it. That's what our general approach is. So when there are upgrades, we don't have to do a lot of hard work.
I will advocate that as a healthy stance.
Yes.
Christian asks, if you have an MFA as a requirement, would you meet the requirement if one is using a YubiKey? Will that be a second factor?
100%, yes.
And then I think we're just going to make it. Anonymous attendee asks, are you able to configure this login flow to only allow WebAuthn on UNC networks such as a campus or via VPN?
Yes.
Excellent. And then David comments that RefEd's MFA profile is explicitly a multi-factor profile, not a strong authn profile. So I will acknowledge that. And with that, I would like to say thank you to everyone for participating and the great questions, and Tariq for your wonderful summary information of your experience, and good luck on the deployment tonight. And with that, I will pass the baton back to April.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I echo that thanks to both you and Tariq for a engaging discussion this afternoon. As we're wrapping up, just a couple of reminders. Once again, want to reiterate, we will provide the recording of this afternoon's webinar. You can expect to receive that in your inbox in the next few days, and you'll also find it on our website. Please complete our Zoom survey. We really value your feedback about IAM Online, and we would appreciate you taking the time to complete that survey. If you have general feedback, you can certainly get in touch with me, April Motley. My email address is there. Want to let you know about our next program, which is extending IAM to the cloud. Will be Wednesday, November 16th. And if you generally have ideas about future programs, we do have a web form up on the IAM Online website at your convenience. A couple of other quick reminders, just want to make you aware, this Friday, October 21st is like a mega day here at Internet 2 and In Common. That is the last day to take advantage of reduced registration rates for TechX. And during TechX this year, we will be having In Common Camp Week, which some of you may be familiar with. That will be in person at TechX. So again, those reduced registration rates are available through this Friday. Also, ending this Friday are our early bird rates for our next round of grouper training, if that is of interest to you. And finally, do want to remind you that this is our last call for nominations for In Common advisory committees. The call for nominations also ends this Friday, October 21st. So if that's of interest to you, please take a look at that information, which is also on our website. And in preparation for next month's program, Cacti, which is our Community Architecture Committee for Trust and Identity, has prepared a pre-webinar survey. And we would ask that if you have the opportunity to complete that survey, you would do so. We'll be sending out more information about that, but did want to make you aware of that program and that opportunity to provide input prior to the next webinar. Thank you again to Tariq and Steve, and also to our meetings and convening team, to Susan and Carly for supporting this program. And for everyone who attended, we will see you in November. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.